Berg. You listen to Workers Radio on 88.9. We've got Craig Isherwood from the Citzens Electoral Committee, or
Council,
commonly known as the LaRouches. Craig, good morning.
Yes, morning. How you going?
Much better. Peachy,
mate.
Creamy. I can hear you.
Yeah, good.
That's good. Now, what were we talking about? Cosmic radiation?
I want
Cosmic rays.
I want to get off that issue and talk about the green agenda, and if that's cool, to talk about the Queen and the royal family and other things like that. The newspaper's got a lot of that sort of issues in it.
Yes, fine. Look, we published the paper because of the idea that this whole fraud of global warming in particular, but not just that, the entire environmentalist fraud has not come about by accident, but actually as an extension of the eugenics movement, known principally by what Adolf Hitler did back in World War II. Now, this is a program. The whole environmentalist movement, particularly here in Australia, globally, has been a deliberate fraud, and it's been propagated over centuries by the likes of the support for people like Charles Darwin is one, and Charles Darwin is basically nothing more than a prodigy for a guy by the name of Thomas Malthus.
Malthusian.
As in Malthusian, that's right. Thomas Malthus was from about 1760s to the 1834, but he was promoted by the British East India Company, that is the British Empire at that time, specifically as its chief economic spokesman, in order to control the population. And when you got into the 1860s and you had this tremendous explosion of population, particularly in the United States under Abraham Lincoln and after Abraham Lincoln, because of the tremendous optimism associated with the defeat of the British Confederacy in the United States and the explosion of optimism around science and technological development, that had to be shut down. So Darwin was one of the key guys that was promoted through this fraud of the idea of natural selection.
Okay, you've opened up a lot of ideas there, and
I have. Yeah.
And if you use the word fraud too much, I think you get people offside, because we've got a lot of emotional connections to our education and our upbringing and our ideas. And
we were taught that Charles Darwin was this hero that discovered the theory of evolution. He went on the Beagle. He went on the voyage of the Beagle.
Galapagos Islands.
He went to the Galapagos Islands and he discovered
finches look different on every island.
Yeah, we all learnt that in school.
No, that's the problem. We're in a British education system, and we're supposed to believe what we're taught. However, when you actually do the digging behind this, even read this guy, you find out that he's nothing but a plagiarised puppet.
Who did he plagiarise?
Malthus himself.
So Malthus put out the ideas that the human or every species develops and changes. So that he came straight from him.
That was the idea, yes.
Well, I think I don't know. I've still got an emotional attachment to evolution. I think that you can see genetic mutations causing differences between generations, and fruit flies. They do a lot of research on fruit flies, and they found that you can create subspecies of fruit flies that can't breed with the old ones. And I think there is mutation and things do change. So I don't like to throw out the whole baby. I mean, I think there are agendas behind things, and certain science is pushed because there's an political agenda behind it and money flowing from it.
That's true. Look, there is, of course, species have changed over time. They've evolved, yes, but the cause is not a statistical correlation. See, all Darwin did and others did was look at things from a sense certainty point of view, to look at things and say, oh, well, this must be related to that because of these particular physically seen characteristics. The underlying cause of why that happened was never asked, never questioned. And so that's the difference between, say, the likes of Alexander von Humboldt and other real scientists. They actually look at how the universe functions and don't just draw correlations between what is seen. And that's statistically speaking. Now, Darwin was a product of people like Quetelet, for example. He was there's people like Francis Galton involved here. That was the founder of the eugenics movement.
So I don't know about Quetelet, but
I would love to know more about Humboldt.
Yeah, Alexander Humboldt was a universal genius and naturalist of the period leading before Darwin. In fact, Darwin, did not dare to speak up about his theories whilst Humboldt was still alive, because at that time, Humboldt was someone that actually recognised that the way that the universe worked was based upon these things called physical principles. That is, that you have underlying forces, underlying principles that you can't see, but govern the way that living processes in particular actually change.
Is this like emergent properties? Because, you know, in complexity theory, they talk about emergent properties.
Well, see, again, if you come back to mathematics and you start to put mathematics and various things like that over the top of living processes, that's the whole problem, is that mathematics has no place in living processes. Mathematics is a statistical measurement of underlying physical processes, and that's what's taken place in science today, that everything is reduced down to mathematical formulae, when in fact the universe doesn't work that way.
Okay.
And that's the difference between, why Darwin in particular is being pushed, in that everything is reduced down to statistics, and that's the whole argument with global warming today.
Well, of course, that was Richard Dawkins, the blind watchmaker. Now, that the concept of the blind watchmaker is kind of like, that is actually a beautiful kind of concise summary of what evolution is. It's like it's a blind process which somehow creates complexity.
No, so that's where we differ, because that implies that there's not an order to the universe, and there is, because we have a governing principle within our universe called creativity.
That's it. Right? And can I just break in on that point?
Yeah.
I think science as we know it, there's Asian understanding and Indian cosmology and Chinese cosmology. They understand that there are two forces. There's a destructive force and there's a creative force. And I want to talk about, just briefly, that energy, all combustible engines work on the explosion principle. There are other machines which work on an implosion principle, and that is a creative force that creates. Well, it doesn't, have what I'm saying. There's the yin and the yang. There's life and there's death, and there's creation and destruction. And this whole creative force, this life force, has been denied. Western science doesn't recognize qi, for instance, which is easily demonstratable if you go to an acupuncturist. So there's certain things in Western science that create this ideas that. I don't know if I've made points sort of on a bit of a rant there, but anyway. So
what you're talking about is trying to look at again the principles that govern the universe, and like living forces or life as it is. Life is a physical principle. Living process experience or are dominated by the principle of life, and without life you don't have life. And when you take life away from something, or the means to support life, you have nothing but death.
Well, that's another point. The people who run the world, they like war and they like death, and you see in every major city there are these monuments to their destruction, like war memorials and things. And I think it's a death cult, really. And
it comes from a method again of denying the fact that physical principles actually run the universe, and you've got the principles of life, creativity, and these sorts of things, which you can't see with the senses. You can't touch them, you can't taste them, but you see their effects. Right?
That's it. Now, you can't measure it, but it's there.
Yeah, and if you understand that from a scientific method, that these forces actually exist, and that we as human beings and not animals, we're actually not animals in the sense that we have the power of creativity to make the discoveries of these principles, then that actually enhances our power. So that when you actually have a population that's educated, not just to believe in textbooks and statistical methods, but actually to discover the physical principles that run the universe, of which there's dozens that we haven't, hundreds, if not limited numbers that we haven't discovered yet, then you increase the power of the human race, such that you don't need overlords or oligarchies that are forever creating wars in order to reduce the population necessary to control, necessary for control. And that's unfortunately the situation that we find ourselves in today. The likes of the British royal family have a governing philosophy today of reducing the world's population from 7 billion down to 1 billion. And one of their favourite ways of doing that, is, as you've just noted, is by wars. And that's what the frightening thing is right now with the sorts of forces at play in the Middle East, for example, around Syria, around Iran, is that they're pushing for a thermonuclear exchange in the near term, of which the Russian President Medvedev and also Putin, Prime Minister, Medvedev's just put Russia onto a war alert, where he's increased the necessary defences of Russia.
Yeah, China's done the same as well. They've put alert to their navy.
This is again being pushed by the British Empire through its monetary system. The entire system of the Atlantic system is coming down. They're making all these machinations about pumping credit into the system, and trying to prop it up. But because there's such a phenomenal amount of debt in the system, their system is disintegrating.
Yeah.
And that means that their political power is disintegrating when you're talking about countries like Russia, China, and even India that aren't necessarily in such bad economic shape as those Atlantic countries.
Now, interesting to say, with wars that had to get rid of the debt, as Prince Philip, your mate, would say, a virus would just get rid of everything. That's what he quotes on. Now, Prince Philip was the supervisor, is this true, of the first Green Party in the world, was done in Tasmania. Is that correct?
That's right. What you had was the formation, initially of the World Wildlife Fund in the post-war period.
Yeah.
And then you had Prince Philip personally come down into Tasmania to help establish the Australian Conservation Foundation.
And this guy, our character, Mr. Philip, who quoted that if he was reincarnated, he'll come back as a virus and wipe everyone out. Now, this guy loves human people. He loves the cattle. He wants to destroy it, and he's disgusting. He's a quite interesting character. If you ever watch him on when he meets other leaders and that, he's quite psychotic. But
people trying to dismiss Prince Philip. The mistake is, look, he's just a nut, but the Queen's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem is this is characteristic of an oligarchy, of a ruling elite that actually despise human beings, but they also fear them, because if you had the sort of optimism that broke out in the period under Franklin Roosevelt, for example, in the US, or under Lincoln before him, then these people become redundant, they become unnecessary, and that's what they fear. So that's why we have this environmentalism movement today, created specifically by the oligarchs through not just Prince Philip, but Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, Julian Huxley.
Yeah, and all those guys there. Now,
hey, just a quick promo. Can I just get a quick promo, Jack? Just tonight, I'm going to be interviewing Craig on Truth News Radio, and we're going to we'll get into depth on the Darwin question, right? We'll get into a lot more depth on it.
Yep.
So, and you can get that on Google. Just Google Truth News Radio or truthnews.com.au.
We've seen the Aborigines used as tools again by the oligarchy going back to the anthropological movements of the late 19th century, where Aborigines are reduced from their human capacities and human abilities down into mere beasts. And that was actually the justification for killing Aborigines by the early white settlers. And
they were subhuman.
They were regarded as fauna under the Protection Act.
Unfortunately, it goes wider than that, Hereward. It goes into the issue of indigenism per se, where the idea is that you have to protect these people to be more animalistic rather than actually be human beings.
Right.
All right. We've got to go into the British propaganda news, sponsored by the Queen and the CIA and the M16.
All stand.
M16. Thanks, Craig. We'll get back to you, mate.
God save the Queen.
Okay.
Hail Hitler.
No one else will.